Hello, thank you for joining me on my first live on-air broadcast of the Bruce Montalvo Show here on LA Talk Radio. It's November 11th, 2012, and on today's broadcast I have a very special guest joining me. I will be conducting an exclusive interview with acclaimed actor, writer, and director Enrique Castillo, who is instantly recognized for his appearance in the Los Angeles gang cult classic film Blood In, Blood Out, directed by Taylor Hackford, who produced La Bamba, also starring Damian Chapa, Jesse Borrego, Benjamin Bratt, Billy Bob Thornton, just to name a few who co-star in the film. Now, Enrique plays the role of the revolutionary-minded Hispanic prison gang leader, Montana, the head of the prison clique known as La Onda, in this fictional drama based on real-life accounts written by Jimmy Santiago Baca and again directed by Taylor Hackford. Now, parts of this film were actually filmed in San Quentin, California, just minutes north of San Francisco. Again, this film is a fictional account of real events that took place in the 1970s through 1980s and adequately categorizes the rise of power of the Hispanic prison gangs in California's state prison systems. Now, he has been a star of both the silver screen and television, ladies and gentlemen, since the 1970s, starring alongside such actors as Anthony Hopkins, Denzel Washington, and Jack Nicholson. Outside of film, he has worked with the Eugene A. Obregón Medal of Honor Foundation, which further solidifies this man's credibility as a true Latino patriot by helping raise funds to build a monument at Olvera Street in Los Angeles, California, in commemoration of those Medal of Honor recipients. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce acclaimed actor, writer, and director Enrique Castillo to our broadcast. Thank you very much, Enrique, for joining me today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be on the air with you, Bruce, on a Veterans Day, to remember those in our families and across the country that have served our nation.
Thank you again. Now, it's only fitting, Enrique, that I ask you about your award-winning play Veteranos, A Legacy of Valor, a tribute to 4 Latino Congressional Medal of Honor recipients, being that, like you said, it's Veterans Day, and words alone can't even begin to express what these patriots have done for the American citizenry. It is truly a day of remembrance for those brave men who made the ultimate sacrifice to preserve our Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Now, Enrique, can you tell our audience about your tribute to those 4 Latino Medal of Honor recipients, your play titled Veteranos, A Legacy of Valor?
Well, I wrote it, this was prior to 9/11, so it was in 2000, and I did 2 national tours of it in 2000 and 2004. It's a story of 4 young recipients from 4 different wars, from World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. And it features the dances of the period, the music of the period, with a live band on stage. And it's bilingual, very much like our cultural representation is. We premiered it here in Los Angeles. And it was actually on the 90th birthday of the mother of Eugene Obregón.
Wow.
So we had a birthday cake for her to celebrate her birthday and also to honor her son's memory. We had 4, I believe, Latino Medal of Honor recipients still living at the time that joined us. Were very instrumental in supporting the production. And all across the United States as we toured it, and I made sure that we toured the production to the cities where the 4 young men had been from, including Laredo, Texas, Houston, Texas, and East Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
So the families and the citizens of the towns could pay much-deserved tribute to their citizens, their local citizens, who had, as Roy Benavides so aptly put it, gave up all of their tomorrows so we could enjoy our todays.
Exactly.
I'm very honored to have the families there witness it and give us their seal of approval. Some of them still living, some of them were awarded the medal posthumously. Obviously, to see a Medal of Honor recipient actually walking around is like basically watching a dead person walking and should be dead, considering the active valor that it takes to be awarded the medal.
Exactly.
So it was a real honor to have done the production and to have it received so well by the Latino community and really all communities, to understand that these were stories that are American stories. They don't specifically refer to one particular ethnic group. These are American citizens, and some of them who actually became citizens through the military to preserve the liberties that we enjoy. So it was a real honor. The cultural aspect of the production included, as I said, the language, which is bilingual, the songs, specifically Registro de 1918 was a number that was sung by the Mexicano soldiers leaving from Laredo, Texas, and bidding goodbye to their families in the town of Laredo. And the other cultural aspect was that in keeping with the warrior legacy of our culture, the narrator throughout the piece was an Aztec warrior, which was representative of Huitzilopochtli, who is the god of war in Aztec mythology. So it was extremely entertaining for everybody, while it was also very inspirational and educational. And that's one of the things that we made sure to do, was to create an educational component with the production that would make sure that students could attend the production, and so that particularly Latino students in those cities that had a large demographic come to see the production, so that they could see the sacrifices and the contributions by those people of their culture and within their own families, their parents, their uncles, their sisters, their mothers, who have contributed so much to this country.
Exactly.
It also included an epilogue which briefly commemorates the history and the contribution of Latinos in America's defense from the American Revolution, which many people really don't know, because it's not a focus of history books to portray that aspect of our contribution to the country.
Absolutely. I mean, it's got to be more than just getting an interchange named for Eugene A. Obregón. I mean, they have to. I mean, I was never, being Mexican American myself, I was never aware of Eugene A. Obregón until I drove down the 101. You know what I mean? Right.
Yeah, there's several locations that are named in honor of recipients that are Latino. There are Navy ships that are named after them. Interchanges and highways and whatnot. And as we travel through, we read them or we see them, but very, very few times do any of us really take the time to do the research and find out what the contribution was, who these people were. Many of them could be our neighbors, and many of them could be within our own families, and we often don't spend the time. Prior to 9/11, most of us, even with our own families, never really turned to our fellow family members who had served or were serving or are serving, and say simply thank you.
Exactly.
And in my interaction with the veteranos and also those that serve, that's all they ask for, is at least acknowledge it and don't forget the contribution that we've made, so that you can enjoy the privileges that you have.
Exactly.
I was fortunate enough to play military heroes on television. I was probably the only Chicano or Latino ever on the Waltons, playing a war hero from World War II. And certainly on stage, I played several roles honoring the contribution by Latinos in the military. And so through my experience with my family and interacting with people of my community, and with colleagues. Many of us would always wonder, well, when is it going to be our representation? Why does it have to be simply a name that is said within the context of Saving Private Ryan or any other film?
Yeah.
And then when those films may be produced, as in From Hell to Eternity, I think it's called, the story of Guy Gabaldon in the 50s or 60s, a hero from World War II that was portrayed by Jeffrey Hunter, who was an Anglo, but never really revealed that he was a Chicano that grew up amongst Japanese in Little Tokyo, understood the language, and that was very helpful in his survival and his having received recognition for his acts of valor in the Pacific during World War II as a Marine. And there are many, many stories like that, including Escuadrón 201 from Mexico that flew missions during World War II in the Pacific. Exactly. And has yet to be recognized by the American government. So there are, as I said, there are many, many stories, and trying to do the production of Veteranos was not enough.
Exactly.
I tried to include as many stories as I could, but we have over 200 years of history. As I said, it goes back to the American Revolution, including the Medal of Honor, which was established during the Civil War. There were 4 Latinos in the Civil War. Many of us who supposedly study and know American history never bothered to really research and understand what our true contribution is to the country. We know about George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and the French participation, but never stopped to wonder, well, why is Galveston, Texas named that? Well, it's for Bernardo de Galvez, Latino hero from the American Revolution, as the Governor General of Louisiana during that period, and had a multi-ethnic army that was fighting without gringos to help the 13 colonies. Wow. So were it not for that participation by Puerto Ricanos, Cubanos, Mexicanos, Indios, Negros, and Españoles, there might not be a United States.
Yeah, that's definitely information that they don't want to teach the students nowadays.
Well, that becomes, again, that becomes our responsibility.
Exactly.
If nobody's going to do it for us, then we have to do it ourselves. You know?
Absolutely.
And that was the primary motivation for Veteranos is, and many times when they do produce something like that, we're very dissatisfied because of the portrayal or the casting or the way it's written. And so why not do it ourselves? We're the ones from the cultural group. We're the ones that know the stories, and we're the ones that know the nuances of the culture, and we're capable of doing it, so let's just do it. And that's what I did.
It was an excellent production, I have to tell you. It's great. I saw the video on YouTube. I wish I could go see it. Is it still playing? Or if it is, could you let our listeners know where they might be able to catch Veteranos, A Legacy of Valor?
Well, it is not being produced at the moment. Part of the production was actually filmed by the History Channel and included as part of their documentary Hispanics and the Medal of Honor. But I've had many, many requests to remount the production. Mm-hmm. I've gotten emails from across the country, people that were actually able to see it and have told their friends, and so I get emails requesting the production to be remounted. So within our busy schedule, we'd love to do it again. We often talk about it, and friends, obviously around here that I still interact with, who are veterans or in the military, have requested it, and so it's just a question of making it a priority, and then finding the funding for it. Obviously, you can't do it without funding. It is a somewhat expensive production because of all the elements involved. On top of which, if you're going to tour it, so it would just be a matter of getting the producers involved and actively pursuing the funding for it. But it's always the right time to do it. I don't have to wait for Veterans Day or Memorial Day.
Exactly.
This is something that could be done at any time, anywhere, considering the the amount of representation that Latinos have in the military.
And I think that it's the best way to show your appreciation is to just bring them home. Advocate for bringing them home. I mean, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the downsides of having to do a production like this is obviously the reason you do it is considering how many people have lost their lives in conflicts with one another amongst nations or individuals. The fact that I even have to write something like that is somewhat depressing to me because of what it means.
Yeah.
It means that these young men who are Latinos, very much like my sons or my daughters or many of us in our families, had to actually go into conflict and sacrifice their lives.
Yeah.
That's not something that I would wish on anyone. I have never met anyone who is more anti-war than someone who has been in war. Many of them have told me that. Would they want to do it again? Of course not. Nobody wants that. So the fact that we have to do these kinds of production is it's such a melancholy feeling, you know. But if it's going to be done, then let's do it with dignity, with the honor that it deserves, and the respect, and the simple thank you that it merits from all of us.
Exactly, and the tradition aspect as well, like you said. Now, I wanna ask you. Moving on, I wanna ask you about the role you played in Showtime, where you play Cesar in the hit TV series Weeds, where you were casted alongside Demian Berchir. I hope I said it right. Who plays Esteban Reyes, mayor of Tijuana, Mexico, in seasons 4 and 5 of Showtime's hit TV series Weeds. Now, you were basically his right-hand man, Enrique, his bodyguard. What can you tell our listening audience about your experience with the CBS-owned network Showtime and the cast of Weeds?
Well, it was a great experience. It was difficult at times, only because of my character and how he appeared. In contrast to the situations that the production reflects, which is it's a dark comedy.
Yeah.
And many of the people were extremely talented from a comedic standpoint, and so I was involved in many scenes that were extremely humorous, but I could not laugh or smile. And it was difficult in that respect, but of course, you know, as a professional, you have to work the role.
Yeah.
But it was difficult in that respect, but extremely enjoyable. Everybody was brought their A game to the production, from the casting directors to the costumers to everybody. And it was a very enjoyable experience with everyone. Everyone got along. I never saw any conflicts on the set. Everyone was extremely prepared. Everyone loved their roles. It was a very enjoyable situation all in all. And, of course, I loved working with Demian, who has now been nominated for an Oscar for A Beautiful Life. So he's extremely talented, a consummate professional, and a terrifically nice guy. That was the best part of it. He's a really good man. So it was extreme pleasure to work with him. I'd met his brother in Mexico, Bruno. So he comes from a family of entertainers in Mexico that understand the profession, they understand the craft, and they conduct themselves accordingly. So it was an extreme pleasure and honor to be working alongside him. And from the standpoint of the characters themselves and what they represent, which many of us who are socially conscious kind of reflect negatively on our culture.
Yeah.
The mayor is and all the people, including myself, are criminals. And if you see the trajectory of my career, you will not see that many characters on my resume. And that is for a very specific reason. Number one, I've always come from a standpoint of being socially conscious, particularly when it comes to my culture. And I was also part of the El Teatro Campesino, which we always try to reflect a positive aspect of our cultural struggle, whether it be from the military standpoint or the farm worker standpoint. I grew up as a farm worker. In my family were migrant workers. And so I'd always refrained from even auditioning for roles that reflected a negative aspect of our community. And so for quite a while in my career, I didn't do that. And especially because I had young children. And I did not want them to have to go to explain to their peers that their daddy was the rapist or the drug dealer in a production that they saw on television, because I know that many times the public cannot separate the character from the actor.
Yeah.
And so once they were grown and understood that this was a craft and I was not the way I portrayed characters, thank goodness that I was able to exist long enough, on the work that I got. But I was able to sleep a lot better, and I still do. So the other saving grace about the production and the character of Cesar is because everybody in the production, including the Anglo characters, were all questionable characters, including the lead. So we were all in the same pot.
Definitely.
And that was helpful.
You had some great scenes there between you and Demian. I mean, just the overall excellent performance in Weeds, Enrique.
Well, it was, it's, again, it always begins with the writing. And I have to hand it to the writers. They were very open to suggestions. They knew that we understood the Latino culture better than they do. So they were willing to learn and collaborate. I shared the background that I had created for and characters that I was using as a model for Cesar, and it was received with a lot of appreciation and open-mindedness. So it was enjoyable in that respect. So it was never just do it as I write it, and that your motivation is your paycheck. It was never anything like that at all. Mm-hmm. And of course, Genji Cohan, the creator's vision, was reflected also in that, and her person was reflected in the production because she's extremely open to collaboration, very creative, and a very nice lady. And so the entire production from crew and everybody, it just reflects her personality.
Okay. Now, Enrique, I want to ask you about the bid out there to decriminalize marijuana, cannabis, entirely, and the recent bills out there that have just passed in Washington and Colorado, where the citizenry can now possess up to an ounce of cannabis and can partake of the plant recreationally without fear of being incarcerated. Your thoughts?
Well, since it was a measure on it became a political issue. There's one thing that I insist on is whatever I vote for in the polling booth, mm-hmm. I never reveal. I don't understand why you would have a private cubicle with a ballot that you mark without your name on it for no one to be able to read and judge you by it. Why then would I come out into the public and reflect what I just did?
Yeah.
I've never understood that. I take that very seriously. Even my wife does not know who and what I vote for. Mm-hmm. That's between me and my conscience. However, if we want to discuss the issues, it's been part of a cultural experience for more than just Latinos, from a medicinal standpoint to a holistic one. So I think the issue has to be revisited from a much more comprehensive standpoint than just to say, oh, it's for recreational purposes, so it's no harm done. Well, that's what they say about social drinking, and look what happens. You end up with your face, wrapped around your steering wheel because someone was not responsible enough to know how to handle it.
Yeah.
So, if you're going to discuss the issue, you have to discuss it honestly, truthfully, and rationally, without just simply saying, well, it's just for recreational purposes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, nothing is really just that. It's not that simple. As much as any other issue that comes before the electorate. It's not just a black and white situation. So I'm all in favor of discussing it. It was part of my past, in my history, in my youth. And so, sure, as an experience, I do understand the impairment that it caused in me from a physical standpoint. So for me to be able to say, it's like somebody saying, well, I'm a social drinker, or I'm a functioning alcoholic.
Yeah, I've heard that.
It's just a rationale for some people to be able to eventually abuse a situation and claim, well, it's just a personal issue. No, I'm sorry. When you're doing it in public or even in private, that doesn't mean you're going to keep it private. You can simply step out of your house, get in your car, and move on. And if you're drunk, you're going to take somebody's life, possibly.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of issues to discuss, but I'm glad that it's out there for discussion.
Exactly. Now, Enrique, you wrote a novel with a supernatural twist. Now, can you share the details of that novel with our listening audience?
Well, it was originally a screenplay that's titled Valley of the Dead, which is the original name of the Imperial Valley, around where the Salton Sea is. So all of the action takes place in that county, in Imperial County. The protagonist is there are a lot of cultural elements to it. There's a mythological element, and the characters on either side of that spectrum are very deliberately named. Sometimes I interchange genders for the characters. Say, for example, the lead protagonist, his name is Gabe Luna. And there's also a kind of duality involved in that the cultural aspect, which is Judeo-Christian versus or contrasted to indigenous philosophy, and duality. And so the character of the lead protagonist is named Gabe Luna. Gabe, from a religious perspective, being the patron saint of communication, Saint Gabriel, who the character then has become very uncommunicative. Mm-hmm. So that's the duality within him. His last name is Luna, which is traditionally associated with the female aspect, but he's a male. And then one of his allies, her name is Daylight Savings Time Begins Today. That's her name.
Okay.
And her name is being Daylight, which is reflective of the sun, is more often associated as a male. Mm-hmm. And so the genders are transposed there. One of his other allies, his name is Angel Nava. He's a deputy. And so his name is Angel, but then Nava is indicative of Navaja, which is,
knife,
which is an avenging angel.
Okay.
And so there are those kinds of elements involved. The lead protagonist is a Chicano sheriff who, at an early age, tragically lost his family and an infant son to a criminal, a carjacker, and as a result of feeling responsible for it, he self-imposes himself in that environment, this hellish environment, in a little two-building remote desert town called Comal del Diablo. So essentially, he's put himself in a purgatory, and he spends the rest of his life there trying to track down the criminal that caused the demise of his family. And he interacts with his allies and antagonists there. The lead antagonist is an Anglo border patrolman and he has his criminal elements and partners that they call him El Loco, which obviously is close to Loci, which is the Norse god of mischief.
Mm-hmm.
And one of his partners is named Arnold Benson, and Arnold being the revolutionary traitor. And then he has these two border patrolmen are partnered with a Chicano coyote, who actually is an American citizen, but as a result of his criminal activity in the United States was forced to flee into Mexico with family there, and that's where he conducts his activities along with the border patrol. Their interests primarily are financial, but then they involve a violent situation that invokes the animas of all of the violence towards women that has occurred along the border
mm-hmm.
to Latinas. These animas eventually, not just in recent past, but in ancient times, all the history of violence against women throughout Mesoamerican history converge, and they possess this one young mother that is victimized by these negative elements, and through her they begin to exact revenge on these individuals, start tracking them down, and that sheriff actually begins his story begins in the Otay Mesa up by Jacumba in a high 4,000-foot elevation, but because of his criminal activity, which he's never really been prosecuted for, the Border Patrol is forced to transfer him into the Imperial Valley. So basically they're sending him to purgatory.
Wow.
And then those two elements there, the good and the evil converge, and that's where the story takes place.
Wow, that sounds like a very interesting book. When is it scheduled to be released?
Well, I hope so.
Oh, I'll read it, and I'll advocate for it to be read, Enrique. But when is it going to be released?
Well, where it is just before I had finished a film in Texas, and then I was actually able to take like 2 months off, and then focus on it, and finally finished it, and then I was able to do a rewrite and chapter breaks just before I went on this last project to the Dominican Republic.
Oh, I was going to ask you
about
that. Yeah.
I sent it it's with an agent right now, literary agent, that's going to read it and then give me the feedback. I have sent it to very few people whom I know, but I have not gotten their feedback either yet. So, I understand people have their lives to live, and it's not one of their priorities. So, but certainly, we'll see what the agent, what the feedback from the agent is, and then we'll see. But I've been encouraged by other friends who are authors to consider self-publishing through several means, including Amazon and iUniverse and whatnot. So, but I want to wait and see what this agent says, and then I'll go from there.
Excellent. Now, I did want to ask you about your the project you just finished filming, Kill the Dictator, where you spent a month in La República Dominicana, the Dominican Republic. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, I'd never been to the República Dominicana, and being there, it was awesome. I mean,
I could imagine.
From a temperature perspective, I left the desert for a reason. I grew up in the desert. I grew up in Imperial Valley, so as a farm worker, so I know what it's like to spend working days in the extreme heat. And so in the Dominican Republic, obviously, it's also extremely hot and also very humid. Two of my least desirable experiences, but very helpful towards using it as a motivation within the story, because that's where it took place. It's a story of the assassination of Rafael Trujillo, who was the dictator of the Dominican Republic. He was assassinated on May 30th in 1961, and I play his right-hand man, who was the head of the SIM, which is Servicio de Inteligencia Militar.
Okay.
And this was a very ruthless individual who basically is very infamous in Dominican history as a person who used every means of torture conceivable to control the population. They rode roughshod over the country to their whatever whims was blowing in the wind, and they were rabidly anti-communist, but to such a degree that even the American government conspired to have him removed and possibly assassinated. However, it was done by a cadre of concerned citizens within the Dominican Republic that galvanized and eventually were able to terminate his dictatorship.
Wow, that's excellent. Now,
so it's a true to life story. I don't usually look at dailies or whatnot. I put a lot of trust in the director and the project, but I was able to see the setup of shots from a cinematographer's perspective, and it looked awesome, particularly because you got to remember that the Dominican Republic is where Columbus was, and so a lot of the buildings are extremely ancient there. They go back to that period, and some of the stone that was used in some of the buildings is still there. Now, we went and toured also the house where Columbus supposedly lived, which was still intact. And you're walking on these streets and cobblestones from the period. From a historical perspective, it's awesome. And then, of course, we're working in basically the White House of the Dominican Republic, where Trujillo walked around, and Johnny Aves, the character that I played, where they conducted their affairs and had meetings about what they were going to do to assassinate bishops from the Catholic Church.
Wow.
And from that perspective, it was really rewarding, and it was a real enjoyable experience professionally and culturally.
Okay.
Dominican people they worked their tails off. I got to say that I was very, very impressed with the effort that they put out. I never heard a complaint, considering the weather that they were working in on a daily basis. They were consummate professionals. Yes, the learning curve is somewhat different from what we're accustomed to here in the United States. We have more of a history and certainly more financing for it. But in terms of the human, the sweat equity that they put into it, and make do with what they have, you got to be impressed by all of that. And it's really helpful to them and to the film industry for the former president to have carried the torch for the new film incentive law that was signed and is now in effect, that is going to allow for not just Dominican filmmakers, but anyone who has a production to be able to come to the Dominican Republic and take advantage of that tax incentive and create more work, not just for ourselves, but also for all of the Dominican people, so that they can have continued careers in entertainment.
Exactly. Now, I want to ask you about your character in Blood In, Blood Out, Montana, who had a Shakespearean-like fall from power in the movie. He was writing a book in jail. Can you give our listeners an inside scoop into Montana's book?
Well, it was called A Chicano in Prison, and there actually is a book that we were given copies of also, that had been written and was primarily from a you got to remember the period at the time and how these guys were able to gain the power that they did was because of the language. But they weren't able to figure it out before because they were trying to figure out what's going on with these guys and how are they gaining this power and what are they doing. And so they used to send in psychologists and psychiatrists and whatnot to talk to these guys and try to find out, well, this guy's not going to talk to anybody. So eventually what happened was this anthropologist went in there and basically was able to observe the conduct and figured out that a lot of it was based on the language and a lot of it is eye contact, the way the communication was. And so this person who is used to studying from an anthropological perspective was able to gather all of that information and determine that these guys were conducting a lot of their business in a language that was not understood by the prison administration in front of guards that were not Spanish speakers. So that anthropologist wrote a book that I believe it's called the Chicano Prisoner or the Chicano in Prison, and so that became the model of what Montana was writing. But what we discussed, being Taylor Hackford, the director, myself, and Jimmy Santiago Baca, who, by the way, is not just the screenwriter for Blood In, Blood Out, but he's also an amazing poet, very well established, and won multiple American Book Awards for his poetry. And to hear him read is just so inspiring. But anyway, we would discuss the contents of that book, and of course, it was out of concern for the disproportionate amount of representation by specifically our cultural demographic in the prison system, and what we needed to do to counteract that. In other words, we need more lawyers to keep Latinos out of prison rather than more cops to put them in prison.
Exactly.
And education, of course, was fundamental. That needed to happen, and so that is why Montana admonishes Miklo for having failed his parole hearing, and insists that he educate himself and hopefully become a beacon of hope for those on the outside. Unfortunately, he did the reverse. But it was a matter of Montana ruling from a position of wisdom and integrity, and Miklo ruling eventually from a position of fear, which contrasted the two. And also, of course, I don't know if most people may or may not catch it, that during that killing montage towards the end that Miklo orchestrates, a very deliberate shot of him turning his head towards camera, and you can clearly see the enhanced blue eyes of the character. That kind of tells you, that where historically many civilizations have been conquered by those eyes, to a degree where the phrase "the sun never sets on the English Empire" was,
That's where it came from.
That's where it came from.
Now,
so those elements are what we had discussed and what probably would be included in the book.
Yeah. Well, Enrique, I want to ask you about your role in Nixon, 1995's Nixon, starring Anthony Hopkins, and his portrayal of the notoriously corrupt 37th President of the United States, Richard Milhous Nixon, which is personally why I am a libertarian. I read about this guy and his fall from the presidency as a result of the Watergate scandal, June of 1972. Now, you played one of the White House plumbers in that film, Virgilio Gonzalez. Can you tell our listening audience about the film and what it was like working with legendary director Oliver Stone?
Yeah, I had gone in to to meet with Oliver on a previous project. He was going to do the Noriega story, another dictator, the dictator of Panama, who had been, collaborating with the CIA at one time. And we all have seen that picture with him and George Bush Sr.
Yeah.
And so we met at that time, and then I got a call that he wanted me to work on Nixon as Virgilio. And, I jumped at the opportunity. I'd always wanted to work with Oliver. I have great respect for him from a professional standpoint, and the fact that he had volunteered to serve in Vietnam. So I have a lot of respect for him for that. And also because it was an opportunity to, again, work with Ed Harris. Ed Harris, who he played Liddy. And we had actually made our first film together, a project called Borderline with Charles Bronson. And,
wow.
And we played a couple of coyotes there. So it was terrific. I played a Cuban, and so as a cultural group,
yeah.
we were a Puerto Rican, and I was Chicano, and somebody else was a Cuban, and so we had several Latino nationalities there, all collaborating to portray these plumbers. And yes, alongside with Anthony Hopkins and playing our president, who, as you see, many individuals who are well-intentioned, but somehow their personal shortcomings end up getting involved and derailing whatever good they could have done, which is very, very unfortunate. It happens to everyone, not just Republicans. It happens to Democrats also.
Well,
It has happened historically,
Well, I wanted to ask you about one of the White House plumbers, actually, Frank Sturgis. I don't know who plays Frank Sturgis in Oliver Stone's film, but basically the fact that he was an elite member of Operation 40, an elite hit squad that consisted of Cuban refugees at the time who were angry with the Castro dictatorship and were operating clandestinely under the leadership of Nixon during the Eisenhower administration to assassinate Castro. So I think your character, Virgilio Gonzalez, in Oliver Stone's Nixon, was there to during the Watergate scandal. He was there to find documents that would link Nixon to the Bay of Pigs. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I don't think there's any denying now. You obviously know the information. A lot of it has been declassified. Thank goodness that it does. Again, a lot of well-intentioned people that for whatever, either selfish, political, or psychological reasons, end up committing crimes that violate even the tenets that they stand for. However, that element, which was what the plumbers represented and what they were willing to do, is in stark contrast to what has been developing in Florida, particularly with the results of this last election.
Yeah.
When you see the younger generation who is far removed from that period of history, that they are not as rabid from one side, let's say, right-wing extremism, that now they're able to see things, this younger generation, with a much clearer perspective of who they are and where they are, that's a period of history that doesn't really need to be revisited.
Oh.
It hasn't happened. The overthrow of the government in Cuba has not happened. It hasn't happened for a reason, because legally they can't do it, right?
Yeah.
Kennedy said they can't do it anymore, so that has been a standing rule from the administration to administration. Situations are always evolving and changing, so you see a different perspective now from what was going on at the time.
Absolutely.
And that goes across the board, even from the military who were in Vietnam. I have a lot of veterano friends who are Latino and some that are not, that are returning to Vietnam. They have a totally renewed sense of perspective, and you realize it's like from a personal level, let's say in your past you have a conflict with an individual, and many times in the heat of the moment it's very, very important to you, but then years later you run into each other and you realize, what was that all about, you know?
Yeah.
It's like it's no longer that meaningful, so much so that you have to dehumanize each other in order to what? Make you feel better? It's so portraying a character from that era, I cannot look at the character like the character that I just played in this film, Kill the Dictator, who is probably one of the worst human beings that I've ever had to portray. Even to Montana, who is the head of a prison gang, and then Cesar, who is the right-hand man to the top drug dealer in Tijuana. I cannot look at these people, these characters, and say they're bad guys.
Yeah.
These are family men who have a personal perspective that sometimes become like-minded with other individuals, and they galvanize, and they feed off of their frenzy sometimes, and then their personal shortcomings can factor in, become misguided, and commit acts that totally violate the tenets that they stand for. At one time, well-intentioned maybe, but then totally distorted, and they end up doing things like Nixon did, which is very, very tragic.
Exactly.
Not totally unnecessary.
Well,
and so we're finding that out right now as a result of this last election, where now you hear even on the talk shows, wow, they're talking so much about the Latino.
Yeah.
From both perspectives. And also they're talking about, wow, what a novel idea, compromise. You know?
Yeah, we're starting to get the recognition that we deserve now in America. I mean, I want to honor the veterans, obviously, who it's Veterans Day, that if it wasn't for their sacrifice, Mexican Americans like myself wouldn't be on the radio today.
Absolutely.
Veterans like Ismael Villegas from where I'm from in Casablanca, Riverside, California. Again, Eugene A. Obregon, Rudy Hernandez, all these veterans who I wasn't taught about, and I'm a Chicano, so I had to grow up and try to learn, on my own account about my culture, and it's definitely more rewarding when you go out there and you learn your own culture on your own terms. Well, Mr. Castillo, unfortunately, we're out of time. I would like to thank you for joining me on my first official broadcast here with LA Talk Radio, and I look forward to many other exclusive interviews with you in the near future. Thank you for joining me today.
Well, it was my pleasure, and congratulate you, and I wish you much continued success with it.
Thank you. That was Enrique Castillo. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I am Bruce Montalvo. Be sure to listen to us Sundays, 12.